Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Celedon, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of Public Policy of California, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the third event in our 2024 Speaker Series on California's Future. We are delighted to present today's program, Spotlight on Rural California. Rural California is vast and varied with unique challenges. To explore these challenges and some of the work already underway, today's program will begin with a conversation with California Assembly Republican leader James Gallagher, followed by a panel conversation featuring state and local leaders. Moderating both conversations is PPIC President and CEO Tani Cantil-Sakauye. As you all know, for the last 12 years prior to her joining PPIC, Tani served as Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. This event is part of PPIC's 2024 Speaker Series on California's Future, and we would like to thank sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. Their support makes it possible for these events to be free and available to the public. These organizations are listed on the screens and on the program on your tables. This series is also funded by PPIC's Donor Circle and PPIC's Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC, and we certainly appreciate their support. Please visit PPIC's website to find information on how you can join PPIC's donor circles or sponsor one of these events. And before we begin, a few items that I'd like to mention. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. At the end of today's program, there will be time to respond to audience questions. For those who are here in Sacramento, please raise your hand, and PPIC staff will come to you with the microphone. Please make sure to state your name and organization before asking your question. And if you're joining us virtually, please send an email to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And be sure to also include your name and organization along with your question. PPIC staff will be monitoring these questions that come in and incorporating them in today's program as much as possible. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, please join me in silencing your cell phone. Now on to the program. I'm pleased to turn it over to Tani, who is our President and CEO, who will moderate today's conversations. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sandra. PPIC is lucky to have leaders like you. Thank you for that warm welcome. As Sandra said, we are doing something a little bit different at PPIC today. We're doing a two-part event. We have the pleasure of having the first part of the event, a one-on conversation with Republican Assembly Leader James Gallagher. And then after that, and there'll be no Q&A, we're going to move into a panel discussion with three distinguished leaders with the spotlight, like the panel, like our leader, on rural California. So we're going to take a little break in half an hour. Don't leave. We're going to set up for the panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we'll have 15 minutes of live Q&A. So thank you for your attention to this. I also want to say that before I give a brief introduction of our Republican Assembly leader, that all of you know how critical rural California is to the strength and engine of California as a whole. And most recently, PPIC has a publication on our website that provides data, research, facts that are very interesting and exciting and promising and challenging about rural California. So I urge you to go to the website. You'll be surprised. You'll be inspired by seeing what's happening in rural California. And now, on to our one-on-one. We are especially thrilled to have Republican Assembly Leader Gallagher. It's a busy time at the legislature, in case you don't know, and we're lucky to have him here. He has an accomplished bio, and I will not and cannot in our time together go over it. but I will ask you to go to the PPIC website where you'll be able to see it in detail. And I'd like to give you a few highlights of this very distinguished leader. Let me first say that before Assemblymember Gallagher was elected to the legislature, he was a supervisor on the Board of Supervisors for Sutter County. He's a lawyer and a sixth-generation Californian who grew up on his family's farm. He is also a partner in his family's farming operation. Welcome. My first question.
Good to be here. Thank you, Tani.
When it comes to supporting California's rural communities, what are the most important issues for the state policymakers to work on this year?
I think I would start just more generally is that there does need to be a difference in governance when we talk about rural areas versus urban areas, because they are very different. And so when you talk about things like, for example, electrification, it is very expensive, costly, and in many cases not feasible to do fully electric. One of the issues we saw here recently was the electric school buses law that came down. And a lot of these things were pointed out that, in many parts of rural California, these are very long bus rides that need to be taken to get to and from school. Many of these places can't afford electric buses. It's hard to get them, supply chain issues. But then when you talk about the travel distances, it is not feasible. You may even lose charge in many cases. This was pointed out, especially with my colleague, Assemblywoman Megan Daly, pointed this out, and unfortunately that wasn't taken into account in the policy, and we're seeing those impacts right now. That's just one example, though. I'd say largely in Northern California, for example, we have actually very clean air. We don't have sprawl. I bring some of my colleagues up north, and one of the first things I point out is I go, hey, you see how there's a separation between the towns? They don't just abut up next to each other. You gotta go there, to get to Orland, for example. And there's distance in between these towns and cities. And I think that's a great thing. I think we've been very good stewards of the land, of our water, of our air, but that often doesn't get taken into account. We end up having to have kind of the same mandates and rules that they can be very burdensome. And then I'd say lastly, when you talk about agriculture, which is, the cornerstone of California, very important to our economy, especially in the rural areas. A lot of these different mandates that come down out of government are very costly. And the thing that people often don't understand is the farmers don't get to just charge a higher price for their commodity. They're price takers. So we can't just charge more for the Big Mac. Whatever I'm going to get for, 100 sack of rice is what I'm going to get that year. And so when we increase costs, which we've done exponentially in agriculture, and we've seen commodity prices drop, when you talk about walnuts, almonds, many different commodities have seen their prices drop, it's very devastating. And those are jobs, those are key inputs into the economy. We saw with the drought, for example, 200,000 acres fallowed in the northern Sacramento Valley. That didn't just affect farmers, that affected the farm workers, that affected every vendor that's involved in providing inputs, equipment, small diners in those towns, and service providers. So we need to ensure that we really take into account those specific rural needs in our policy making.
So that's very interesting, because it's clear that you speak from a place of experience and the lived experience, and of course being a state leader, when you talk about the challenges that exist in such a critical part of California that don't get considered in the first instance. And these are complicated issues. And when you talk about rural communities, how do you propose lawmakers and at all levels really take into account or remember to include these big issues in an area of California that feeds the world?
I would say, one, I think it is possible to sort of have different standards based on what's going on in that region. And I guess that'd be more of a regionalism in our policy making. I think that's possible to do, and I think it's something we have to do in California. And we talk about this a lot. California is a very diverse state. And so because it is a diverse state and there are very different needs in different regions of the state, it almost makes sense to have more of that, regionalism in governance. And perhaps have different standards that take into account what might be going on there. So when you talk about emissions, maybe recognizing, for example, that we aren't really the cause of the large-scale emissions that you see. We don't have the kind of, urbanization and industrialization that you might see that might be contributing, and that trucks are a big part of our life and how we get our goods in and out and to port. And so having, a lot of people, I'll give an example on that again, like a lot of people say, hey, if you're trying to reduce emissions, hydrogen maybe makes more sense when you're talking about trucks and you're talking about moving long distances. Maybe we should be doing more on that front rather than just a focus on electric, for example. So I think we can do that. And I think then the last thing I would say is that's why it's so important that we have a true legislative process. What do I mean by that? I mean that bills should be going through committee. They should be going through the whole process, the whole legislative process. And there should be a lot of input. And we should really strive to take into account the needs of all parts of California in that process. We've seen here lately that's been less and less so. A lot of these bills being worked on, not in the legislature, but outside in back doors, and the final deal getting struck and then just sent to the floor for a final vote. That's not how we should do policy. And one of the big problems with that is that it doesn't take into account all of the voices that need to be heard in that policy-making process.
Well, you point out a good point about democracy. One size doesn't fit all. And we are a representative democracy legislature. And we, like PPIC, like you just pointed out, we believe there is benefit from hearing all the voices to get to a better solution that fits, rather than, as you've described, electric buses without charging infrastructure, while your child is making it to school to and from each day, 5 days a week.
Right.
I'm going to ask you a little bit more about approach, and this has to do with budget. So, focusing on the budget and the deficit, we know that California is facing a sizable budget deficit, and the governor proposes to address the deficit by drawing on reserves and using a combination of spending reductions, delays, deferrals, fund shifts, and other strategies. Can you talk about the state budget picture, including any current legislative proposals to address the shortfall, and what do you think are the most promising ways to ensure fiscal sustainability?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenging year. There's no other way to say it. And there will have to be cuts. And I think that's something that everybody, I think, understands. But then the reality is, okay, how do you go about doing that? And what is the most, sustainable way to approach that? I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. And we, as Republicans, have been saying that we were on an unsustainable path in terms of spending, that you couldn't count on these record high revenues forever into the future. And when we had the touted $100 billion surplus, a lot of that was federal money. It was COVID money that had come in. And it was also due to some pretty high stock market dividends that are a big part of our revenue. And a lot of us were saying, look, you can't count on that. That's not going to be there long term. Now, the governor's office say, well, a lot of that was one-time money. Well, yes, but you could have put more of that one-time money, away. You could have put more of that one-time money maybe into infrastructure, maybe perhaps mental health beds in this state, like helping seed money, that vital infrastructure need that I think we're all seeing. But instead, we largely spent a lot of that money and at least put some of that money towards ongoing spending that is putting us in this place now where we have a $73 billion deficit. So we are going to have to right-size that. And the governor and the legislative leaders apparently have a deal to do some early action. Still waiting for a lot of the details on what that exactly looks like. But for me, my perspective, I think where we should start is making sure that we take care of the fundamentals of government and then move out from there onto what else we can do. And to me, the fundamentals is education. We need to make sure that we are funding education, that we're reforming education to ensure we're accounting for all kids. There's still a large achievement gap. Infrastructure needs, we need to ensure that we're really addressing those infrastructure needs. And I think that should be a very important focus. And public safety. I think we've all seen that, we have a real issue across the board when it comes to public safety. In rural California, I'll give you an example. We have, many areas that are going to where they don't have day shifts for their sheriffs and police. And that's because of, not having that sufficient funds that are invested into public safety. And then kind of add insult to injury, now we're sending CHP to places like Oakland and San Francisco who have cut back on their public safety. So it kind of feels to us like we're subsidizing places that didn't make that investment in public safety. That can be pretty frustrating. So I think we should get those three, to me, let's really focus on getting those three things right, and then we can talk about what else we can do. I mean, another way to think about it also is we made some pretty big spending commitments, in these, fat years, if you will. What did our governance system look like before, and the funding there? How, you should probably start with the newer commitments that we made. Can we still continue to do those? When you don't have the same revenue. And when you've got to right-size your budget. So I think that's a good framework of things I think we could think about in terms of how we go about, balancing the budget this year.
Well, what you've described too, I think, is truly symbolic of what every public-funded entity is going through, and purposes of those of us who were funded by the general fund have to go back to basics and priorities and look at those last funded ongoing costs that are building out your budget base year after year, and assess whether that's a priority, since it was a last add-on. And I know those are really hard decisions to make, but using the process you described, where all voices could be heard and things actually go through committee and are heard, where all sides are able to present the pros and cons of the policy cuts and the budget cuts, I think, as you point out, will better serve California. I didn't hear you mention in that, but I understand from our research that homelessness and housing issues in rural areas are on the increase. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen a rise in homelessness. We've seen more money spent than ever, only to see the problem actually get worse. That should be, a huge red flag that we are not doing the things that are working. Here very soon, we should have the audit released on the homelessness spending. One thing I think it will help tell us is, hey, what is actually working? What is actually helping to get people off of the street and empowered out of homelessness? And what is clearly not working is maybe just enabling that homelessness. I'll tell you my own perspective, and I've shared this with in other forums I've been a part of at CSAC, for example, is I do favor a more regional approach, that we should have sort of regional systems where, kind of everybody has skin in the game. But I think I favor like a regional shelter and services approach. Many of our counties and our local governments can contribute in-kind, mental health, drug addiction resources to help get people into a better place. And I think that kind of approach where, the state certainly has investment, but also everybody's kind of contributing to that on a regional level, rather than what we have right now, which is really we're putting the burden on each jurisdiction to kind of come up with their own thing. And it's very expensive. It's very burdensome to those individual either cities or counties. And I just think that, and then look at, hey, what are the things that are really working, right? Don't keep spending money on the things that aren't working. Let's put money into the things that are working. And that would be a more, I think, efficient use of our dollars, and also more effective, use of our dollars at the end of the day.
It also seems like, based on your answer and what you've described, regionalism and regional support allows for creativity. And I think you've even mentioned a sort of little bit of skin in the game in terms of regional support. You mentioned a little bit about this, but I wanted to ask you, particularly as it pertains to rural communities, I wanted to ask about extreme weather, drought, wildfire, and floods. How do these situations and events impact our rural areas different from urban areas?
Well, for that, I'll go back a little bit too, because I think this is important. We've certainly seen extreme weather, and I think it's gotten a lot of focus, but let's also remember that California is a place of extreme weather, and it has historically been so. Has anybody in here ever heard of the super flood? The largest flood in California history, do you know when it was? 1862. It was prior to large-scale industrialization. This has always been a place of fire and flood. And a great resource to go to is Battling the Inland Sea, which is a great book that's written about California's history of flood control. So we've always faced these, pretty extreme drought and flood periods, for example, here in California. Climate change has been an exacerbator of that, right? So it hasn't been the cause of that.
Right.
It has been an exacerbator of that. So now we see like longer dry periods. Now we see where water can come a lot faster, like when we have runoff, warm rain on snow. But I'll tell you, I remember that even when I was a kid, we were always worried about warm rain on snow and Oroville Dam. And everybody became much more aware of Oroville Dam in 2017 when the spillway broke. And that's a good segue into where I think we need to go. The problem is infrastructure, and that we need to have better infrastructure that addresses these facts. One of those would be we need more water storage. You do need to store more water and be able to have that flexibility in the system to move water when you need to. Sites reservoirs, a project we've been talking about since Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, yet we still have not built it. We passed a water bond, over 10 years ago, before I even came in the legislature. We still have not built any significant water resource infrastructure with that water bond. So the real way to address these things, wildfire, the 100% primary cause of these devastating wildfires is fuel. We have a huge buildup of fuels in our forests and our wildlands that we need to address. And only recently have we spent significant monies addressing that. We need to maintain it, and we need to have better technology. There's many things coming online, like biomass to hydrogen. Traditionally, we've looked at biomass to electricity, but biomass to hydrogen is one of those ways. There's innovative. We were just talking about a project to use biomass and then also take that down to the Port of Stockton, where it could be used as a cleaner burning, fuel in many different industries. So I think we need to be innovative, and we need to invest in new infrastructure, modernizing our infrastructure, making sure we maintain what we have so we don't have Oroville Dam situations, because we're going to need all of that to better manage the extreme weather that we see. But it's not a new thing. I mean, I think that has to be pointed out. It is not a new thing by any means in California. We've always been at war with nature. In fact, Ken Cooley, my former colleague, would bring this up. If you look at the frieze in the state capitol, there's a sculpture up there, of a native on battling against a grizzly. Mm-hmm. And well, according to Ken Cooley, and I trust him that this is right, that is a symbol of how California is always is kind of battling against nature, right? And they're trying to bring nature under control. Hard thing to do. Very difficult thing to do. We obviously have not mastered it, here in California, but I think it's something we've always been trying through engineering, through innovation, have been trying to figure out how to do. And I think the key is making sure we continue to make investments in infrastructure and innovate our infrastructure.
Thank you. I enjoy the historical perspective as well. I don't have enough time with you, so I'm going to turn to my last question.
Sorry, my answers were a little too long.
No, we only have half an hour, and so next time. My last question to you is, it's consequential election year. We at PPIC are tracking, our government affairs unit is tracking the initiatives, the measures, what's qualified, what's going to qualify, what's going to the legislature. And so this is being a consequential election year at the state and federal levels. What's at stake for California, and what issues do you think will predominate?
I think the number one issue right now on every Californian's mind is the cost of living. I think that many families are sitting at the table and saying, how do we pay the bills? And when you look at our utility costs, which have gone up exponentially, when you talk about our fuel costs, everybody knows the price of gas is way too high, and despite what everybody may say, people still need to get to work using gas-powered cars, and that cost is very significant, especially in rural areas. Insurance, if you can get it. In some places, we're having difficulty there, but that insurance cost is going up. Groceries, the grocery bill for so many families is unbelievable. I have a family of five, or I have 5 children, so it's been very, we've seen it going up quite a bit. So we have to do something to figure out how to bring down costs in California. Cost of housing, we have to address the cost of living issue. I think that's one of the biggest issues that is consequential to these 2024 elections. Public safety, what we're seeing on far too many streets in California, rampant crime, theft, but also violent crime that has increased 13%. We have to get on top of this public safety crisis, and it requires policy changes. Fentanyl, we need to get tough on fentanyl dealers. I don't know why that's such a hard thing. Last year in the legislature, we had a big debate and fight on this, and the only thing that really came out of it was one bill that said, hey, if you have over 500,000 lethal doses of fentanyl, that you could have a higher sentencing. That's ridiculous. We need to have something real that gets on top. Online, the online sales that are going on, we need to get tougher on. So I think that's a big consequential issue. And then I'd say homelessness. We have got to figure out, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, a better way on, and I think more of an empowerment strategy out of homelessness rather than an enablement strategy. Look, I think the days of just, hey, meeting them where they're at on the street, providing, syringes and providing all the services there is not working. And the encampments, allowing encampments in our public spaces so they're not usable, by the public, that has to go away. We do have to enforce on encampments, and then have places where people can go, where they can have shelter, but also services to get them out of what is causing the root causes of their homelessness. So I think there's a better path forward on that. That's certainly something we as Republicans have been talking a lot about. And so I think those are going to be some of the very key issues as we go into 2024, and that I hope we'll see some more real substantive action on in the legislature.
Thank you. Those answers resonate with us. I know PPIC has done a recent survey, and the top issues that Californians are thinking about are the economy, jobs, as mentioned, cost of living. All of that is wrapped into quality of life and decisions made for people who live here. And I just wanted to ask you as a last, because there's sort of been breaking news in some respect, how about healthcare access in rural counties?
Great question. I wanted to just end on the public safety front. We have to get back to supporting our men and women of law enforcement. And what happened, a few years back with the defund police movement, and we are losing law enforcement officers, people saying, I'm going to get out because of the different things that have happened, because of what we've seen, policies that come out of this legislature. We have to support our men and women of law enforcement. That's who's on the front line keeping us safe. And I think the good thing is, I think we're starting to see a shift away from that. And that is a good thing. We're seeing that in different places, but that's going to be key. Rural health care, it's about access, and I think a lot of what we've been doing lately is, okay, we've made sure that more and more people are insured, but just because you have a card doesn't mean that you can actually get access. And so to me, one of the big issues, our rural hospitals are failing. They are failing. And we made it worse last year with the healthcare minimum wage increase. And the governor and all of those know it, and that's why that'll probably be part of the early action, is saying, hey, we're going to have to slow that down because it's having a devastating impact. Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are very low, and last year they passed the MCO tax, renewed the MCO tax to kind of get those back up, but I'm already hearing people say, oh, we might have to pull back on that. well, look, you can't have people providing care that you don't provide the cost of giving care. I mean, that's why a lot of rural hospitals are failing, is because we aren't providing, those kind of resources. I also think clinics are a big part of that, especially FQHC clinics that I think have been really vital. Indian healthcare services have been really vital in rural areas. How can we find ways to expand and get more of those healthcare hubs in rural areas, I think is really important. And I think those also kind of better leverage federal and state dollars to get that care out. And we need providers. I mean, providers is the other key thing. We certainly in rural areas, right now in Butte County, for example, we're trying to get, we have gotten a mental health residency program that has been set up there. It's very early stages, but trying to get more and more people trained and have their residencies in rural areas, right? And I know this has been a big thing in the Central Valley as well, so that we get providers to stay and actually work in the rural areas where we do have that shortage.
Thank you, Assemblymember Gallagher. You've left us with a lot of interesting thoughts about regional solutions, sharing everyone at the table so that the solution can fit all Californians and not just a few geographically. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your time. We look forward to having you again, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, with this exciting panel, I invite you all to please take your seats. We have distinguished leaders at all levels of California governance who've served in past and present, regionally and statewide. Again, also representing our important rural communities. And their bios are far too long for me to use our precious time together to read to you. So I invite you to our PPIC website for some details, but I will give you some brief background on our three members here today. To my left is Senator Shannon Grove. Senator Grove currently represents California's 12th district, which includes Fresno, Tulare, and Kern counties. She has served as a leader of the Senate Republican Caucus, and prior to the Senate, Senator Grove was elected to serve in the California Assembly for 6 years. Next to Senator Grove is Supervisor Chris Lopez. Supervisor Lopez serves on the Monterey County Board of Supervisors and is the chair of the Rural County Representatives of California, known to all of us as RCRC. And next is the president and CEO of the Central Valley Community Foundation, Ashley Swearengin. You may know President Swearengin better as the mayor of Fresno, where she was the 24th mayor, where she was twice elected for 8 years. And we are proud to say she is also a member of the PPIC Economic Policy Center Advisory Council. Welcome. We are thrilled to have all of you here. Thank you. So the first question, and I'll start with you, Senator Grove, is when it comes to supporting California's rural communities, what, in your opinion, are the most important issues for state policymakers to work on this year?
So being the representative of Kern, Tulare, and Fresno counties, it's the top 3 food-producing counties in the world. So obviously water is extraordinarily important. There are other counties in the state that don't produce any food, but they eat our food. I can guarantee that. One of the other things is domestic energy production. My district has 70% of the state's oil and gas industry, which is under attack right now. One of the things that we do to replace the 1.8 million barrels of oil we use every single day is we import it from foreign countries, some of them hostile to us. We bulldoze down the rainforest. We get oil from Saudi Arabia. We get oil from Iraq. We get oil from Venezuelan, what they call black flagships. And because we still have a large consumption in this state of oil and gas. So in the rural community, in the rural areas that I represent, both of these industries provide economic security for us. Both of these industries provide excellent jobs to second chancers, people of color, and individuals who are, if they're willing to show up, they can teach them a skill and a trade. And a lot of our oil industry and our ag individuals really have a great opportunity for success and upward mobility. One of the other things, that's on the economic piece, we are really struggling in the rural communities with crime rates, just like in the crime rates that we see in metropolitan or rural or other areas, urban areas. And so we need to address that, because the problem that we have in some of our areas is that there's one law enforcement officer on the entire west side of my district. And so backup is very difficult and law enforcement is very scarce. And our citizens and the people that we serve deserve to have that protection as well.
Thank you, Senator. Very interesting and really critical matters. How about you, Supervisor Lopez?
Yeah, thank you. Thinking about that question for us, the calls that are coming in today, what's impacting people's lives, it's the insurance piece. It was mentioned a little in your last conversation, but the inability to get insurance, the fear about that sort of Damocles hanging over families' heads at this moment. They say, a gentleman came up to me at a town hall I held earlier this week, and he said, I feel like they don't want me to live rural anymore. I feel like I'm being squeezed out of my rural lifestyle. He said, because I've got a mortgage and I'm being given 90 days to find a solution. And I think that piece, finding solutions for maintaining our forests, making sure that we get creative on solutions like we're doing at GSNR, pressing pellets is our goal and sending those around the world for clean burning. Making sure that people know that we're doing our part is a big piece of how we create a solution that helps reduce the impacts of fires over time. And I think for our families right now, that's the biggest piece to me in our rural communities. How do we support families? The other piece I'm hearing about constantly is roads, road conditions, concerns about gas tax falling, and with the advent of EVs and the benefits that come from that we've heard about, there's a question of who's going to pay for the maintenance of our roads over time. We hear a lot about VMT. Right, and this question about a structure that will, I'll say, penalize people for driving more. Folks who live in my community, they don't have an option to get to those rural communities that they live in. A grocery store is a 30-minute round trip, and they're going to be penalized for going to buy milk for their kids. It's a tough structure to be looking at without having real deep conversations, as Assemblymember Gallagher spoke about, in terms of finding real solutions for communities that look like ours. I think the biggest piece for our rural communities going into a tough budget year is wanting to be part of the conversation, right? Bring us to the table, make sure that we're part of your solutions. We're ready and willing to have those conversations, but if we're put in a situation where we're not asked to really inform the solution, we're going to have real big challenges where we often feel like an afterthought rather than a real part of those solutions.
Understood. And I know recently PPIC did some work with a presentation with the new Assembly Speaker, and mentioned the Rural Spotlight. And while we are soon to meet with the leader of the Senate, also we'll be bringing up the Rural Spotlight. And so we're looking forward to being able to take some of these concerns to them as well, which they probably already have the lived experience. Mayor Swearengin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. Okay, so first of all, please don't call me mayor. There is a mayor of Fresno, and his name is Mayor Dyer. I'm just here as Ashley in the Central Valley Community Foundation. I have the privilege of being on this stage and not being responsible for being an elected official. So I just want to say, first and foremost, to my colleagues here, to the senator, to the supervisor, the responsibility that you bear to respond to what is today the challenges that are being experienced in your districts, like, it is beyond overwhelming to think about. I have the privilege of being able to step back a little bit, and in my role at the Community Foundation and with so many community partners and every sector, we get the opportunity to kind of get up on the balcony while our good friends and colleagues and leaders are thinking about how do we manage today. We have the opportunity to think about where are we today, where are we trying to go. And so I'm the least probably best positioned person to advise on what the state needs to be thinking about from this cycle of policies and bills, but let me tell you what we're thinking about in our region, Fresno, Madera, Tulare, Kings, Merced, Mariposa, et cetera. And frankly, it is a really exciting, if you can stop for a second, put the challenges of today aside, it is a really exciting time right now to be in a region of California that is both urban and suburban and rural. Like, in our region, that all comes together, and you'd be hard pressed to find another region really in the whole US that has the balance of sizes of communities that we do in the central part of the state. I'll give a huge shout out to this initiative called Jobs First. The Newsom administration is supporting 13 regions. We've heard a lot today about regions so far. I think that's a really critical thing going forward, no matter what. We have to think about our place, our state, as multiple regions coming together. So 13 economic regions in California. We're in the Fresno-Madera Tulare Kings region, and we've been partnering closely with Secretary Ross from Food and Ag, Secretary Crowfoot from Resources, Dave Shabazian is here from the Department of Conservation, and what they've been helping us understand. I mean, by the way, let me just say, I feel like the spotlight is on and I need to make some confessions. So first of all, as a person who's worked in community and economic development for 25 years in this area, I have always thought about my place as a city in the middle of a valley. And I finally have been confronted on enough occasions from people on the eastern part of this region who have said, do you realize that every time you say Central Valley, that you're turning your back to the forested part of our region? And do you realize that your climate solutions, your building materials, your clean air, your clean water, it actually comes from the forested part of your region? So at what point will people who are in the flatland and in the urban and suburban areas of the state finally look up and realize that we don't really have the future that we aspire to, but that we turn and face and embrace the part of our region that is usually left behind, and that tends to be the rural communities. So all of this to say, kind of taking a step back and thinking about where are we trying to go in our region. Very, very difficult times we're living through, but if we can focus on 20 years from now, how do we transition from fossil fuels? How do we get into a position to make what we use and not have to import it? That can only happen if urban and rural are coming together. So I'm hoping I'm giving Dave Shabazian's talking points well enough, because I've learned all of this from him. But it really is kind of an awakening in our part of the region that our climate future, our food future, our fiber future, all of the basics that we need to sustain life, hopefully lower costs, have a vibrant future, it is as these two things come together. And as you think about it that way, and last point here, as you think about it that way, it makes a lot more sense to invest in rural and forested parts of the state when you're thinking about it in isolation, like, oh, this hospital that is so expensive, or this infrastructure, or whatever. Yeah, it's hard to swallow, but when you see it as a part of an overall system, and you see the way that vibrant, healthy, safe, and sustainable rural and forested parts of the state actually fuels what's happening on the valley floor, it starts to make sense. And perhaps you can leverage investments, and perhaps we can actually get there by 2050, like we're all hoping to. So anyway, that's just kind of the view from here, not having to deal with constituents every day and consider really tough challenges and passing bills and that sort of thing. I think that's where we've got to put our focus, is on the future.
Thank you. The different perspectives here are fascinating for us, and there's not enough attention on rural counties, rural issues. People think of California, and rural is not one of the adjectives that comes readily to mind. And so while I have a series of questions coming, my question now is based on what you've all answered. If you only had to focus on one issue in a rural county this year, or rural community, what issue would that one issue be, Supervisor Lopez?
Singular issue. I would say if we're talking about constituents, it's roads. But if I'm talking about the future, it's the internet. It really is that broadband connectivity.
The digital divide piece?
Getting it rolled out, because as we look to where things are headed, everything's going online. And folks say, oh, you have the option of telemedicine. Yeah, tell that to somebody who lives in Alpine County, where to trench through there, you've got to go through granite for years to ever reach somebody's home. Tell that to somebody who lives in rural Monterey County, where we're plowing up the ground every single day to prep your lettuce, your arugula, your cauliflower, and we're proud to do that. But it takes work. And we've made a commitment. If we don't follow through on that commitment to these communities, the plans we're making for ourselves and our kids and our future goes away. And we've become a generation lost because of that lack of access to the internet that we saw during COVID. But beyond that, it is where everything is going for solutions to a lot of the challenges we face. And without that follow through on the commitment, we're going to end up left out in the dark and the cold.
Thank you. Well said and well phrased. The issue now and the issue in the future.
Yeah.
Issue now and in the future. Ashley.
was hoping you would make the senator go next. I mean, I'm going to cheat, right? Like, so I'm not going to say one thing. So sorry to break the rules. But I think probably I would argue for a focus on resources and a systematic approach. And again, this jobs first planning process we're all going through is a pretty unique opportunity to try to get a little further down the path of seeing how all these things come together and seeing if we can't build this kind of bottoms up, regions up approach to all economy, environment, equity, all coming together. So I'm just a big proponent of take a second. It's really hard, but take a second, do some pretty high level strategic planning. It will fuel, the next 20 years worth of implementation and work. And in that 20-year period of time, think for a second about all that we have to figure out. Yes to broadband, yes to watershed management, yes to resource management, yes to transitioning and by the way, let me just say, quick thought on how we transition from fossil fuels. We don't get there, but that there is not a lot of industrial development that's going to happen. Like a clean future is an industrial one. We are going to have to infrastructure for the next 20 years. We're essentially building a new society in all of our regions. So I just think coordinating all that has to come together and actually getting into position to do those things, not just talk about them, but do them. That's got to be somehow we have to hold a focus and make sure we're taking steps toward that shared vision and future. Otherwise, my God, we're just going to be sitting and spinning for another couple decades, and that scares me to think about.
So strategic planning, roads, broadband, and you can be a rule breaker too, Senator. You can either say now and in the future, whatever issue, if we were just to be singular, what would it be?
I was going to call it unfair, and the reason why I say that is because if you're dealing with somebody sitting on this stage that's from San Francisco, BART and housing and economic security, the cost of housing would be a huge issue. Our issues in the rural area are extraordinarily different. Going back to the San Francisco legislator that I had a conversation with, my hospitals in my community, some of them are failing. Some of them are very successful, but some of them are failing. And when I talk to individuals who could, again, not just picking this thing, but we have a healthcare issue, an access to healthcare issue. I have a hospital in Ridgecrest, and I know it's just not one thing and not like that one hospital, and I know we have to have a strategic plan. But immediately, drinking out of a fire hose, representing a rural community, I have a hospital in Ridgecrest that has closed down its emergency room to standby section, eliminated their labor and delivery department. It is 70 miles to the next hospital. Now, don't think about driving down I-5 70 miles. You're going down a canyon road that has 60 feet of rock on one side and 40 feet of river down on the other side in a 2-lane road. Tell a woman to hold her baby going down that trip. You think about that for a second. It is also the representative hospital for the China Lake NAS Naval Air Warfare Center, which is a South China Sea protector, which is the largest research and development arm for the United States military across this nation. And you cannot recruit talent to keep that base open if you can't have an emergency room where these young techie individuals that are in their parenting years to have a place where their child goes. And I talk to other legislators that I work with in very urban areas, and they're like, well, just start a foundation and get somebody to give you $10 million. I don't have that person in my district. So healthcare is a huge issue. I'll talk to David Shavazian, as he has pointed out to be here, which I didn't see when I walked in. I apologize, sir. The 2024 scoping plan that this administration and this department put together. And so we acted on a 2045 scoping plan, and we acted to be able to downscale what people consider carbon-intensive fuel, domestic energy production here, and it was going to have us do it 2% a year, which would be a tough road, but it could be manageable by 2045. There may have to be adjustments. But instantly, once that was put in place, they go to 10% reduction and 9% reduction, and we're up to 300 permits a year versus 3,000. We have to have shall witness come out. So to produce domestic energy, when we have not reduced significantly the energy that we consume here, and we're getting it from foreign countries, is not an answer. It's just really not an answer. It is lower carbon intensive to produce that energy here than bring it from foreign countries across our ecosystem in bunker fuel ships that deliver it to our parts that circle out there 12 miles off our coastline, by the way, because CARB only counts the carbon emissions for that delivery system from point of origin to point of destination within that 12-mile space. So we don't get a true carbon emission emission report from CARB on that issue. Rural healthcare, domestic energy, and I'm all of the above. I'm hydro, I'm solar, wind. My county that I live in, Kern County, there are 58 counties in this state, and my county produces 53% of the renewable energy that you all enjoy. So it's all of the above, but we have to do it strategically, because the bottom line is if we eliminate our ability to refine these products and to produce energy here, we are going to have an infrastructure problem when everybody kind of wakes up and says, oh my gosh, we may need to delay this, and it's going to be too late to go back. So a thoughtful, considerate plan needs to go forward, which I agree was the 2045 scoping plan, which we are not using, and I am extraordinarily concerned about roads and people getting in and out of Shaver Lake area on One Bridge Road. I'm very concerned, like the supervisor brought up, but I am really, really concerned about access to healthcare. Extraordinarily concerned about access to healthcare.
Thank you. These are really important things for us to hear. And I'm glad to know that there are people in the PPIC audience who are in a position to address this or bring it up as policy. These are takeaways that are not readily available from other publications or other events. So this is truly a meaningful conversation, and I know I appreciate it. Thank you. I wanted to call your attention to 4 years ago this month. The COVID shutdowns began. Our state has been changed, continues to change. We continue to react to the change. We're all looking for our footing. The California economy is showing signs of strength. I wanted to ask you, what's the current economic picture in your area and your challenges, your opportunities? And I'm going to start with you, Senator.
Okay. So I only know how to be me. I'm sorry. And sometimes I'm a little rough around the edges. COVID was an issue. I'm not saying COVID wasn't real, but the government's response to COVID, isolating our students, keeping them out of school, the government's response to COVID on how we operated as what was considered essential or non-essential, I think created some really difficult situations that I don't think any of us have ever gone through before to rebuild those situations. When you have a business that was deemed non-essential and all those employees were laid off, but they were still able to garner, it was a ripple effect of problems that we now have to solve. They were able to garner unemployment benefits at no fault of their own, and we had to sustain our employees, but we also now have, a $32 billion deficit that has to be repaid, which will be an additional tax on employers going forward this year. We've been through that in 2008, I believe was the last time we did that, with the unemployment insurance overdraft fund. When you look at the education gap that our children are sustaining right now, that is a huge issue. In the real world, I often say, I've been in business in this state for 30 years in spite of this state sometime, and those of you that are employers out there will understand that comment. And the response and the way people have responded to COVID has created a generation of individuals in the up-and-coming workforce that I think, whether it's law enforcement, teachers, or just everyday average jobs. I was in my office and a perfectly qualified 27-year-old individual was getting a job, his job placement. He was going to go to work, and he was excited. It was a $32 an hour job. He had the electrical stuff as a helper, the skill set that he needed. And the placement coordinator gives him the card and says, report here at 5:30 tomorrow morning. And he goes, 5:30? He said, do you have something at 9-ish? Like not 9, but 9-ish. So I think that, we're having a difficulty, and I talk to employers all the time that are having difficulty attracting people to the work site that actually you have to go to a work site. People want to work from home. I get it. It's convenient. So we have those issues. I am really worried about the achievement gap that we have in the next generation of our students. We have 50% of our students are failing math. You have 70% of our students failing science. And that's the next generation is going to be making decisions about all of our lives and the future of our state and our country. They'll be making those decisions on legislative or, on making rules over that governs our lives as we get older and move on into the future. And so I think that those things desperately need to be addressed.
Thank you. Supervisor Lopez.
So the question was opportunities.
Opportunities,
Sorry.
challenges, or current picture.
Okay.
Challenges.
So I want to ask a question. I want to know who I'm talking to. If you consider yourself to live in a rural community or be from a rural community, will you raise your hand for me? Okay. So I'm talking to flatlanders, right? City dwellers. That is to point out who we are. I want to be clear. When I'm up here today, I wear a hat as the chair of RCRC. We represent 40 of California's 58 counties. And right now on the stage, you have a lot of Central California representation, Central Coast, Central Valley, and obviously a little further south. But I think about my communities that I am very lucky to represent this year north of us. And I look at the challenges which can be turned into opportunities. We spoke a little bit earlier about GSNR. The assembly member spoke about Golden State Natural Resources, the opportunity to turn our challenges into business opportunities for this state. People love products branded California. Look no further than Apple, right, who sends products all over the world, who proudly says made in California. As we look at forest products and that opportunity to produce energy around the world and be an exporter of energy, I agree with you. We produce oil in Monterey County, and I'm proud to represent the San Bernardino oil fields and the men and women who go to work every single day in that line of work, and that's the last place we should shut off the taps for several reasons. But when I look at opportunities for us as rural communities, the light is on us, because when COVID hit, folks looked outside of their cities. They wanted more from life, and what they found was those places that when people think of California, they think of us. They think about the lakes around Mono. They think about the beautiful forest in Humboldt. They think about Sonoma and Napa, and then they get there and they realize, I have no internet. True story. I had a gentleman tell me I bought a $15 million house in Sonoma and I have no internet. Can you imagine? Now it's a weekend home. Those are opportunities for us in rural communities to solve business problems and change our economies for the better, because folks know that where it's at is rural. Folks want space. They want that real California dream. They want to look out on golden rolling hills, studded oak hills. They want to see redwood forests. They want to feel connected to this place that we all love so much. And I think that is the opportunity for us as rurals that we're experiencing today. It's telling our story, which folks didn't want to hear before. They were happy to say the green economy is in the cities and it's all there. Well, you can believe that, but if there's no Tesla charger in Mono, you're going to be there for a long time and really enjoying those hills. So let's get creative and see these as opportunities, because there is a train that we're all on. It's headed in a direction, but for us as rurals, we're taking those opportunities. We're taking those challenges as a way to change the way California does business and comes to see us, because we are the breadbasket, the salad bowl, right? The nut bowl. We're also the vacation spot. We're the place people love to come spend time. So those are the opportunities I see for us, reintroducing ourselves to those Californians and knowing what their wants and needs are, meeting those where they are.
Thank you. And Ashley.
I think the supervisor looked at me when he said nut bowl, so I'm trying not to take offense. But yes, that's true. So yeah, I mean, such great insight and thoughtfulness, Senator and Supervisor, in your responses, and you know, really to just tie it all up with a bow. I really hope that folks who are watching this and taking in all of the comments here today really start to understand California's climate future. California's vibrant, sustainable future depends on its rural communities. Like, that's just a fact. We don't do bioeconomy but for the rural parts of the state. And so it is a real pivot point, and it is a bright and shining moment for these places. These places are underserved, they're under-resourced, they're under-infrastructured. So investing in these places actually means a brighter future for the other parts of the state. So like, that is the big aha for me, as a person who's been working on this stuff for a couple decades in the middle of the state. In terms of industry clusters and opportunities for our 4-county region, we're zeroing in on really 3 major targets: circular manufacturing. We have a pretty bright manufacturing base in the central part of the state. We're gonna need that if we wanna build the stuff that we actually use, which is key to a climate secure future. Then we're gonna have to really double down there. Responsible food systems, and then all things renewables, climate, renewable fuels, et cetera. We know the entire region that we represent in Central California, like we're gonna really be punch above our weight. Kern already does. Like the middle part of the state will provide the renewables for the future. So that really matters. Essential investments, essential infrastructure in these regions. Broadband. Thank you so much, Supervisor, for pointing that out. Water, taking a watershed management approach to our water future. And then no regrets. Everybody should be thinking about this no matter what. It's been mentioned, community health and healthcare in general, micro enterprise, small business development, and then education and skill building. Those to us are the tiers of sort of export, infrastructure, and then essential priorities at the very localist of levels in our region.
Thank you.
And if I may, just following Ashley, on thinking outside of the box, when you look at rural California has such great opportunities when you talk about climate change. You know, we're an all of above district that I represent. I mentioned earlier oil, natural gas, but also renewable energy. But at our Mojave Spaceport, we have the first hydrogen planes. They're converting those engines to hydrogen, and they're able to fly 300 miles for delivery products, right? Hydrogen, water, circling through the engine that used to be in there for gas. And it is so hard to get approvals and all of those things and it takes years to get this process done. So we have the technology and we have people out there thinking stuff up that will make our lives a lot better and meet the climate goals that people have, that the administration has, but it has to be done in a good way. And then also, you look at innovation and technology that we have in the Central Valley and in our mountain communities, it is an abundance of ideas that would work if we could just get government and agencies to be able to allow us to do those things. Like I said, just an example for the planes that are they're hydroplanes, and it's only in Mojave. We have the first EV electric truck charging station going in that's supposed to supercharge these trucks. You know, I'm talking big trucks, transportation trucks that provide goods and services. You have we have the first carbon capture award facilities that were awarded to us in our district. So we have land. You can't obviously put a 6,000 acre solar plant with 2 million solar panels on the Santa Monica beach, but we have land and we're able to do those things, but we are restricted so much from that innovation and technology because of the process that we have to do mundane over and over and over again in order to get these things done for all of Californians. Okay.
I want to switch gears and get your perspectives on the interplay between urban and rural communities. Because most, but not all, of our residents in rural California live in counties that also have what I understand to be large urban areas. And we've seen a lot of, or read a lot about cooperation or lack thereof when it comes to some of the issues in the cities and counties, like homelessness, for example. What sorts of cooperation or connectedness between urban and rural California do you believe are the most important in creating a promising future for our residents? I'm going to start with you, Supervisor Lopez.
I think there's a lot of different potential ways to answer that question. I'll share that in Monterey County, we've been successful in building those collaborative efforts, including a homeless shelter in the city of Salinas, which Salinas is our largest population base. And in Monterey County, a county of almost 450,000 people, they're approaching 200,000. And in that, we recognized that we had to work together, right? Really get around families if we want to promote them out of their living situations. But I think as we look forward, the biggest challenges that lie before us are healthcare, and we've had to stand up emergency healthcare districts in a heartbeat that mix both urban and rural. Last year, the fastest district ever created was done by Senator Laird in the Watsonville area in order to save a failing hospital in Watsonville. And I sit on the board of Natividad Medical Center, which is a hospital in Monterey County. We threw millions of dollars into that pot to help that happen because we recognize that it's a regional failure. If that hospital went down, the impact to families would be significant. So I think the collaboration is there. The question, as I'm taking it, is how do we move beyond that? How do you go bigger? How do you do more? One of the things that I'll share, we talked about internet and the need in my community. I've got 4 cities in my district: Greenfield, Soledad, Gonzales, and King City. And my district is twice the size of the state of Rhode Island. My city is no larger than 20,000. We could have all fought each other for LADA funding, for funding coming through the CPUC, for BEAD and all these other pieces. Instead, we said, let's work together. We created one JPA. Say together, we're going to pull. And we were backed up by Golden State Connect Authority. who helped staff us and put together our later grants. We got more than any other region in the state because of that. We got $2.5 million in planning money, and now we're in line to pull down more. I think it's those sort of examples that we have to lift up and say, when we work regionally, when we work together, rather than saying you're different than I am, but saying we have a common thread, and you're not going to get here by jumping over my ag land. Let's run through, and our pitch is we're going to wire every farm and every home, every labor camp, and every resident will have access to this. And I think it's looking at those opportunities and solutions where a lot of companies have said it's too much for us on the private side. Create new opportunity, right? Look at new potential solutions. The big one missing for me that I haven't had the opportunity to mention today is just housing. I think in my community, if you didn't know, we're housing more farm workers by private company than anybody else. And I am not ashamed to take you and show you one of those units. They are nicer than most of the units that my residents, paying residents are living in rentals. They're incredible 2-bedroom units, fully funded by local ag companies because our ag economy allows for that. They came to us and said, we'd prefer to be in cities, but we said, it makes more sense for you to be on the edge right up against the city. A city could have fought us and said, we don't want you there. We collaborated together, and one of those complexes alone holds 1,500 people right on the edge of the city of Salinas, right? And the Dine shopping center nearby is booming now, right? It's the opportunity and seeing that, being able to have those fruitful conversations with the private investor and the government when appropriate, or doing it together as government. But if you're not in conversation, then you're left out. And those are some of the opportunities I see in that space.
Very well said about collaboration, conversation, public-private partnerships, working together for the benefit of people who live there.
That's it.
Ashley, same question.
Well, first of all, just compliments to supervisor, like that's leadership, right? And I think my comments and reflections are around, so what helps these kinds of cross-jurisdictional collaborations and what gets in the way? And I'm just thinking of, in the Central San Joaquin Valley region, for instance, we don't have regional structures. We don't have places where outside of like one county where folks are called together to sit and learn and collaborate and actually try to align resources. I know in the mega regions of California, they do have some of that multi-sector, multi-jurisdictional governmental infrastructure. It doesn't always work that great, but it's like I really noticed we don't have that in a big part of California. So what that means is it means like individual problems and individual leaders are going and daisy chaining conversations and tables and like standing up this problem solving kind of infrastructure all the time. And it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And I don't know that the answer is, let's imagine some new regional structures that support that and make it more standard and systematic, because that can really turn out in the wrong way too. But I do think in this era of like massive sea change that we're going through, again, the next 20 years, think of all that will need to happen for us to land on our feet as a society 20 years from now. Think about the infrastructure, both hard and soft, that's there to support that, and then evaluate the gap. And you realize there's like some really big gaps that we're all talking about up here today. So, like the thing that gets in the way of the collaboration between rural and urban is not really having the dedicated time and space, but that vacuum is filled by local leadership. And I think the two folks on the panel here are a great example of that. As members of the community, we have to insist and require that our local leaders are working together, that they value that bigger vision and that bigger approach to solving problems. If we do, our leaders will reflect that. And then, one last comment. I mean, gosh, I've been accused of being a professional meeting goer, and I have to say, like, I do go to meetings. Why do I go to meetings? Because that's how you sit down and talk to people, and you find out where there are shared and aligned interests. And you have to bring an entrepreneurial attitude to it and say, hey, nobody requires us to be here, but we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to find a path forward on these kinds of collaborative solutions. So I personally think the Jobs First table is an interesting one to be at. Again, every region in California, if you're here and you're from a local community and you're thinking, I wonder what's going on in my region for this long-term triple bottom line planning, your region is participating. Find out who's involved. Because it's a nice size, like in our case, it's 4 counties. It's big enough to see some of this ecosystem level of problems and solutions, but it's not so gigantic that we can't get our arms around it. So anyway, those are just kind of the creative in this season right now. Here's a table, let's wrap around that, see what we can get done. as we try to push as hard as we can to get to where we want to go in 20 years.
Great answer too when you talk about leadership in 20 years and getting together and preparing for it, because that's what we want in our leadership. We want the future. Senator Grove.
Thank you. I'm going to expand a little bit. We're talking about, regional and rural areas, but I want everybody in this room to know that one of the largest cities in the nation, Los Angeles, would not survive without rural California. They wouldn't. And the reason why I say that is because transmission lines, right, reproduce green energy, solar, wind, and it's transmitted back down to Los Angeles, where they get to take the credit of having, 100% of green technology powering their city. The other thing is that they wouldn't survive without our food. So when you think about it's the urban areas, Los Angeles, not so much San Francisco because we go south, but the urban areas, like the large urban areas like Los Angeles, they depend on rural communities for survivability. Up in the mountain community in the northern part of my district, you have Big Creek Power Plant. It's the largest hydroelectric power plant. All of those resources that come to that are created because of that power plant traditionally go to Los Angeles, California. So without what we do in the rural communities, cities like Los Angeles would struggle to survive. They wouldn't be able to meet climate goals. They wouldn't have other things. We also made an agreement with contiguous counties on parole and recidivism and things like that. Rural counties tend to take second chancers to provide them jobs that would not require degrees or things like that. So we give opportunity for success and upward mobility. So I'm just telling you that when you think of rural California versus urban California, urban California cannot survive without rural California. And that I stand by that statement, and I don't want to put words in my colleagues' mouth up here, but I think they would feel the same way. I mean, we produce the food. You cannot grow the food that we grow in the Central Valley in Los Angeles, California. You can't grow it in San Francisco. And I'm talking hundreds of commodities that we eat every single day. You cannot produce the energy that we produce in the Central Valley in a rural area in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, San Francisco. You can't produce the water, the hydrogen, all the stuff that we use, but yet we in rural California, again, not speaking for my colleagues, we fight for scraps off the table to make your urban areas more successful. And we just want to be recognized as the people that really do provide vital resources to the rest of this state, or at least I do. They may not want to, but I want to be recognized.
One quick dovetail to yours, Apple, a couple of years ago announced they went 100% green, right? And they were proud to say that's produced in California. 100% of that produced in my district and down in a small area most of you have probably never heard of called Parkfield.
That's right.
Earthquake capital of the world. But that is where that energy is produced on Williamson Act land. I know there's a bill working here. We'll talk about that later.
They killed it already.
One big piece that I'm hoping I can leave you all with, because I know we're getting short on time, for me is, as in your world, we look at a really tough budget year, and you're looking at cuts. And we all use the word equity, and it has a different meaning to everybody. But to me, in these instances, what it means is a cut to me of 40% on a program might mean I have to cut 2 out of 5 staffers. Yep. That same cut to Alpine means their entire program goes away, but the expectation of the government program remains. So please consider that when you look at any changes coming to programs or anything under your direction or anything you're advocating for. Understand that for some of our very small counties, if the cuts are not made in a true equitable manner, considering their size, that means those programs go away and the expectation remains there and the penalties grow on them just for being small. So please consider that.
Can I chime in one last, kind of look in the mirror type of reflection for me from this conversation? I would have happily co-signed to the senator's comments, so you please sign me up for that. But I also want to just turn and kind of think, turn and face those of us who live in rural or suburban, rural, mixed kinds of parts of the state, and think about this for a second. And this is a really pivotal moment for all of us. So yes, it's true that we produce the food, et cetera. We all know the impacts of that to our economy. When we have a sort of flat commodity-based economy, yes, we're providing the food for other regions and we're bearing the price. We don't have the quality jobs that are needed to sustain, to improve government service levels, et cetera. Our environment also bears the price. We've got this commodity-based economy. What we're now talking about and what the state is asking of us is hey, all y'all that have the resources that will fuel the clean power and the clean future for the rest of the state, can you now also host our energy, our hydro, our this, our that, or that? I think the answer has to be yes, because we are a part of this state and we all want to contribute, but it needs to come at a price. And that's really what these two are up here saying. It needs to come at a price. It means that we can no longer just do the commodity side of this. We must also embed the research and development, the manufacturing, the creation of component parts that go into the infrastructure and the systems that will fuel the clean power of the future. That all needs to be captured within rural California, and that is going to require investing in the infrastructure, the community infrastructure, et cetera. So I would say, just as a person who does, I do not want to see our region go down the same path we've been on for 100 years with providing low-cost, high-quality food for the rest of the state and nation and bearing the burden of that, and just replace it with, now we're providing low-cost at some point because it's subsidized, low-cost, high-quality energy for everybody else, renewable energy, and we're still stuck.
Yeah.
Like, that's not okay. So it is on us to figure out what our price is, what kinds of investments we want, what we demand in exchange for this great, the sort of great exchange that we make, rural and urban. It's going to come at a price. It needs to, or else, frankly, rural isn't sustainable, which means urban is not either in a green and clean future.
I'm so glad we've had this conversation because there's so many important things for people to hear. And I know that our PPIC researchers follow many of these topics, but you have also informed us. It's a serious conversation about fairness and about the symbiotic relationship and a California that cannot exist without rural, and that rural needs a seat at the table in order to describe what it needs going forward to support this state. Thank you for your time. And I know we have some time for Q&A, and we have some PPIC folks who have microphones, and if you raise your hand and state your name and organization in the time remaining, we're happy to have your questions conveyed to our panelists.
We were that good.
Oh, I see a hand here. Yes, thank you, Ash.
Okay. Hi, my name's Lynn Wheat, and I'm from Elk Grove. And Elk Grove, of course, was one of the fastest growing cities. I moved to what I believe was a rural community that's rapidly becoming urbanized. And we have a project called Harvest Water Project. And supposedly it's going to protect the future of our farming. However, I have concerns that that's not what really is going to happen with that project. Can you please speak to the suburban growth and urban sprawls and how they're really impacting our rural areas and the farming that we have and the future farming we will have?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't help but want to jump in on that as a former large city mayor that, boy, oh boy, is that is such a pivotal issue for our region. Central Coast, Central Valley, oh my goodness gracious. So when I was at the city of Fresno for the first time, we held the line on our urban growth boundary, and we did very significant resource changes, land use planning, regulation, et cetera, because we knew city of Fresno alone, 110 square miles, and of the 62 cities in the San Joaquin Valley, like, we had consumed more farmland than any other infrastructure. I mean, it is a big, big problem. When you're in the flat parts of the state and there are no natural boundaries around your cities, there are no mountains, rivers, like, it just goes. Like, we convert that flat farmland at a very quick rate to suburban housing. And I get that, like, all this stuff has to be done in balance. But anyway, so again, let me say, if we can have these sort of multi-county zoom out kinds of planning moments, we can figure out, like where does everything fit? And if we prioritize the open space, what's needed for our climate future, what's needed from a resource, a habitat standpoint, et cetera, in a lot of the places in the middle part of the state, you still do have land to accommodate the industrial and residential activity and commercial activity that you need. But it really does need to stay within your cities. So anyway, just not answering any question for you, but just to affirm, like, those decisions, maybe say it this way, what is at stake now that maybe we weren't considering 50 years ago, 100 years ago? What is at stake now is not just our food infrastructure, but it's also our clean power infrastructure. It's all on the line. So I'm hoping that free will help local leaders get their arms around what it means to live within your means. That's not just money, that's also the space that you have.
Based on your, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just, the supervisor should really answer that question, really, and I'll defer to him in just a second, sorry. But it's really a local ordinance issue, and your local supervisor in that county that would, it's not, you're saying it's a state issue? Is that what you're saying? You're saying the state is coming into your county saying to determine where you put houses?
Sounded like a specific water
It's
project.
absolutely a local issue,
Okay.
but the local issue now is replacing our farmlands with housing. So our new crop is housing, and that's a concern I have, and I've tried to go up the food chain in politics to have some of this addressed. And I, as an activist in my area, or advocate, I'm totally frustrated with what this is going on. So I appreciate the other gal's comments about this, but I'm seeing this going on, and I'm seeing this going on for the last 20 years when I participated in our county general plan that put a boundary there, a growth boundary, and we can handle all the growth within our county, but our city became a city and is going out that boundary and expanding further down towards the Cosumnes River. Thank you.
So I'll just quickly share. I represent the salad bowl of the world, some of the most fertile land. We produce $6 billion worth of an agricultural product every single year out of our valley, 150 unique specialty crops. And for me, it's the delicate balance between the needs of the community who does that work in terms of housing and the need to continue doing that, because it, as much as I'll share, everybody thinks Monterey, they think the aquarium, they think Big Sur, they think the coast, right? I live on the other side of what we call the lettuce curtain that divides us. When you pierce that lettuce curtain and you experience what life is like on the valley, it's two worlds. It's the California story, right? Inland and coastal. It just is what we've known. And that is to say that our planning that we did 30 years ago is determining how our cities are growing. We determined what the least prime farmland was, the worst land, and said this is the direction you're allowed to grow. We put in hard buffers and it's working. The challenge for me is, even though we've defined those buffers and told folks you have to climb towards the hills, get away from the flatland, because obviously that's where our prime farmland is, I still get resistance. But I shared last week at a different town hall, I had a woman share with me she was being evicted, asked me to come see her unit. It was a laundry room, and she was paying $750 a month for that laundry room. There were 5 other families in that household. When we talk about counts in rural communities, in terms of census, do you think they were honest when someone came to the door and asked how many people are living in the house? We get under-resourced because of the situations that our people live in. So I hear you, but I want to meet the needs, but I think your community needs to do a lot of planning for understanding where they're going to be and stick to those plans on both sides. Because I've seen the pressure come back the other way. Once you've done the planning, say, this is where we're going to go, folks say, stop, I like looking at those hills, don't grow there. It's done for a reason. It's to protect the economy, to protect our domestic food supply, and to continue to do what we're doing. But it takes planning on the local level, and you have to get the right advocates in line to make that happen.
Thank you for your question. We have a question here, Sal.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. It's been very informative. I think all of us learned a lot from today, and hopefully PPIC will do more programs on rural California. My name is Steve Boutan. Senator, if I focus this on you, you seem to, between the lines, I think there's an issue of, do you think that the urban areas don't have sufficient understanding, sufficient empathy, sufficient respect, or something else for the urban areas? Where's the disconnect?
So I don't know. What I have learned over the time that I've been in the legislature is that when I meet with my colleagues that represent different areas than I do, it's interesting to find out what they don't know. You know, when I meet with individuals that are part of agency heads that I've brought to my district, individuals that are in charge of major facilities in my district, it's interesting to find out what they don't know or don't understand. For instance, there was a bill a couple of years ago, and I know I keep going back to oil. It says, you know, they want to do a full CEQA review for every single oil well that's ever drilled in the ground, some bill like that. But when you go to Los Angeles or someplace where there's one oil well in the middle of a city that's designed like a tower or a building, that's one thing. But when you have, I don't know, 2,500 oil wells in a 10 square mile area, all in the same water aquifer, that makes no sense for us. When, you know, someone from a urban area will say, you can't put 6,000 solar panels or 2 million solar panels here, there's nowhere to put them. we have the ability to do that. So I think it's just having people understand. I did make a grave error. My family ranches. I have the my grandchildren will be the seventh generation beef cattle ranching industry. They provide steak to the majority of the people in this room and across this state, along with other family ranchers. And I made the mistake one year of taking a group of legislators to a ranch roping and a branding. That was probably not the best place to take individuals that think we should not rope, give shots, whatever, right? But we have to make sure that clean beef is on your table. I have individuals that say, riparian water rights, and the water board says you have to prove this was your land. Well, I can go back to my great-great-great-grandmother who kept records in the front of a Bible, and that's all I have to say that's our water. So I just think it's a different environment. All of us in this room, no matter who we are a product of the circumstances and where we grow up. I remember, and I'm just giving you silly examples, but they're real examples or information. I was in the lounge one day, and I was sitting with then Assembly Member Wagner, and I was in the assembly, and two incidences took place. A legislator came in and says, I'm so tired of your rural communities, I am going to boycott them and your farmers, and I'm going to buy canned food. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to tell you who the legislator was. And Wagner touched my shoulder, and he goes, just don't. That individual was so frustrated, and I looked up, and I didn't know anything about that individual's district. I looked up that individual's district. She walked out saying, again, you guys are just polluting the air with all your vehicles. And I thought, who makes that kind of a statement? But I looked at that individual. That individual represented a 26-block area in Los Angeles. They don't have to worry about driving 45 minutes to the grocery store. They don't have to worry about driving, 35 minutes or an hour to a hospital. We have to have a vehicle. So I think it's just educating people on what rural America, and I know I'm probably going to get really in trouble for this, but we just did redistricting. And it was funny having a conversation with the Secretary of the Senate, Ms. Contreras, and she goes, there's mountain ranges and there's this and what separates, and it's not just a straight line. And I appreciated her diligence on researching why you couldn't have somebody that was, what appeared to be 30 minutes away is really a 3.5-hour trip through a mountain range. So she did her due diligence, and if we could get other legislators or policymakers or individuals who make decisions that run these agencies to come down and really experience rural America, I think they would have a different taste. And I have experienced that by bringing heads of department to my district that are in charge of these areas, these specific industries, and they had no idea that we were that environmentally friendly, that environmentally careful, that strategic. And their eyes light up when they see the technology and innovation that we bring. So I think it's a big education component in my eyes.
Just to tie on,
Yeah.
the Assemblymember Gallagher earlier used the term stewards, and I think that's what we've been. The reason we're fighting over how to protect rural California is because we've been doing it our entire lives for generations.
Exactly.
And so we're proud to have the conversations with you about how we've done it and how we put it in a position to do it. But for us, we have the record, we have the track record and the experience of doing that, and we just want the seat at the table.
And somebody, just to follow up just in another way, I have people, you have to make ranch land sustainable. Well, we've done it for 7 generations. What have you done for 7 generations? You have to make, you have to have crops, sustainable crops. I'm sorry, I've got a guy that has produced pistachios that we all eat, that I would name the company and you guys would know exactly who they are. The largest baby carrot producer in the world in my district, the largest blueberry grower in the world. They're all 5th, 6th, 7th generations. We know sustainability. Just let us do our thing, and we'll elevate everybody's prosperity.
I think that we have all learned a great deal today, and we hope to have this conversation again and longer. Graham, I wish I could have gotten to your question, but next time. But really, serious issues, and from people here who lead and know, we look forward to your work. PPIC remains deeply interested. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing today.
Thank you.
Good job, you guys. Good job.
Thank you.
Photo? Okay, I do better connected.